how do you know if you've experienced trauma, and how can it be healed? That's kind of a broad, intense, heavy question, but go give it your best shot, Jacob.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that question. Because I think that word trauma, I think we mentioned on previous episodes before, like trauma there's a heaviness to it. There's a connotation to it for sure. Like trauma back in the day, it's not that long ago, but trauma was first, investigated, like PTSD specifically with veterans, right? Yeah. So it's always had this kind of big, intense meaning behind it, but I think that meaning has changed over time. I don't think trauma is just sticks to a specific type of event, but I kind of want to broaden that, and I'm not trying to minimize it or sugarcoat or anything like that, but I think maybe another way of looking at it, like events that are really significant, events that really stick out. And even if we think about those events or memories, I want to take me one step further. Like when we do that, how does our body respond to that? Like if we're noticing even slight changes, like my heart rate increases, or my muscles get slightly tense, or we feel some pressure around our head, or get a little bit fidgety. If that happens, like that's a decent indication that there might be some feeling there. There might be some significance to those memories. Yeah. And one of the reasons why, just share some of the nerdy science behind it, if that's okay. Some of the reasons why, like our body responds in that way, the way God created us is, or the way God has allowed us to be, our body's taking information all the time. There's something called exteroception, which is where we get information from our five senses, but there's also something called interoception. And interoception is, there's some stuff with the vagus nerve, there's some stuff with the insular cortex, but it's essentially like these receptors that, like around our organs, like there's even something called baroception, which is our veins, but like when our bodies are preparing for something or responding to something, our bodies are going through changes, right? Mm-hmm. So like if we're thinking about a memory and our body responds in such a way, there might be some level of anxiety there. There might be some level of even some really low level of fear there as well. Because when we're thinking about these things, different parts of the brain are a little bit more active. We have the amygdala, which is kind of known as part of this fight or flight system, things like that. So that's one way, and that's some of the science behind it. But
well, and I love that you mentioned, really even the history of it, how we started to understand and learn more about trauma from PTSD. And, it used to be, only really associated with something like war, something like a big event like that, which, yes, obviously trauma. But I think there is definitely a tendency that we have now in today's culture, where now we know more about trauma and know that it doesn't just apply to that, but we have a tendency, I feel like, to invalidate what we've experienced as, trauma, because we feel like it's not as heavy as it should be, or it wasn't this big event. It was strung out over time, over years, or something like that, and I think we just tend to invalidate it. And so I think that that's a great distinction to make, that, sometime from when it first started being researched to now, we realized that everyone's bodies are different and everyone's minds are different. And the things that we experience, can still be traumatic, even if it's not quite the same as PTSD from the war.
Yeah. And I think you had a really good point, Tori. There can be a lot of invalidation from our experiences, and you're right. Like the more we learn, more research, we understand that people are impacted differently. But I just want to hit on that, like even more. Like, let's say, like when I talk with people, like when I'm sitting with someone, I try to even offer, like what you said, like what's been significant, because sometimes we have these experiences in our mind and we start comparing it to others. Like, okay, like I saw my parents yelling at each other. Okay, to some people, right, that might not register as traumatic. Some it might be traumatic, right? But by having this kind of broad and more holistic, more inviting inquiry, such as using the word as significance, hopefully can allow us to kind of enlighten ourselves on what's impacted us or what has been significant. But I think you're absolutely right. They can get really in a comparative mode, and that can really invalidate. That can really hurt, right? That can really hurt us, and not bring that healing as what the question, the second part of that question was being asked, for sure. Because I think that healing piece is, I mean, one, it takes time, but it takes also that courage to talk about it. Takes that courage to bring it forth with someone to try and
you say that that's kind of the first step that this person should take in healing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be definitely the first step. Definitely the first step of offering space for that, giving yourself permission for that as well.
Yeah, when it comes to trauma and when it comes to healing from these things, can it come back up? I mean, can you ever really be healed from experiencing something really traumatic?
That's a great question. That's a great question. Part of me is like, okay, like what does healing really mean? Is healing the ability to kind of process it, like, and not be triggered by it, or but I think you're hitting on something really, really important. I don't necessarily think healing means not feeling reminiscent and feeling it again. But I think having the things, having the tools to help us process it, to have our feet still on the ground,
to accept it, really.
Accept it, to not spiral from it. Absolutely. I don't think healing means just forgetting about it, and that's not what the question's asking. But yeah, being able to accept it, I think, is can be a piece of it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that that's great. And I love just the way that you worded that. And hopefully the person who asked this question is able to seek the help that they need and know that they're not alone. Like you were just saying, I mean, this is something that has been so well researched because it is so common for people to experience trauma without even knowing, without even being able to process.
Yeah. And trauma, like, if we can just stick with this topic just a little bit more, it's sort of like sometimes like trauma, PTSD, it can come out, it can get triggered. It's sort of like let's say you're watching TV, right? And there's this, you have a remote control, remote thing, what people call it different things, the clicker, whatever. And you're trying to flip through channels, but it constantly comes back to this one channel that's fuzzy. You try and change it, it keeps on coming back. And I'm kind of using that as an analogy. Sometimes what trauma does, it creates this lens, it creates this perspective that we keep on, we view through. And so that's just one way to kind of think a little bit about how do I know if I've experienced trauma? Like, do I continually siphon, or do I continually have this perspective, this lens through a lot of different situations that we experience things from, that we have this somatic experience from? So I just wanted to add that little tidbit.
No, I think that that's a great tidbit to add. I think that's important. And I really do hope that that is able to encourage someone, or even just maybe spark something in someone where they're like, this was significant in my life and I've never talked about it, but I think it affects me still.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think if one person can be impacted by the answering of that question, I mean, that's awesome. So yeah, thank you for answering that. And just your knowledge of the science and everything that you bring into that is just awesome. And it helps me to understand it so much better as well.